Hello, everybody. You know you're in for a treat when you hear that sound because it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast Forums Edition. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home games, and Hold'em_Steelers on Twitter. And I am lucky enough to be joined, legit like I am every week, by this fun group of poker wizards. So just before we get into the introductions, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and website AMP. So, fellas, here we are. It's another week in Rec Poker Nation. So we're playing against each other in the nightly home game on PokerStars. We've taken a hand from the Rec Poker forums, and we're going to talk about it here tonight. And to join me to talk about it here tonight, fellas, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourselves?
I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on PokerStars and Twitter.
I'm John Somsky. I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman50 everywhere.
And they are part of Rec Poker Nation. They are the panel. It's a rotating group we get through here. And we are going to look today at a post by our user Jamin96, who's my buddy Ben from the East Coast up here in Canada, another Canuckian. And Ben was lucky enough to recently win a ticket to a very high roller event that he doesn't normally play in. This is one of the great things about poker. You get to end up taking these shots every once in a while. So Ben was playing in a satellite. Long story short, Ben was playing in a satellite, and he won a $1,000 ticket to a tournament. And he usually plays a much lower bankroll than that, a much lower stake than that. So he had a few questions that he posted in the forum here. Should he even play the tournament? Is this a tournament that he should sell the ticket for and just put that into his bankroll and play the tournament that he's more accustomed to playing? Should he approach the time leading up to the tournament differently? Are there certain things he should be studying or trying to bone up on? While he's in the tournament, are there things that he should be playing differently or ways to be thinking about strategy differently or that kind of thing? And there are a lot of good comments in here. That's one thing I love about Rec Poker Nation. It's such a we all want everyone in the community to succeed. So we're not going to have time to go through all the different people that responded here with their great advice, but we'll just talk about a few things that are good things to consider if you're in Ben's position here and you've won this high stake entry and you're just not sure exactly what to do with it. So we don't really have a great structure in mind for how to do this. We're just going to talk about it out loud. But first of all, don't give up on the idea of just selling that seat. Like if it's real life-changing money, like if you want a $10,000 entry or some crazy high roll for 25K, I mean, boy, would it be fun and exciting to play in that tournament? Oh man, of course it would. Would it be worth $25,000? I mean, boy, I don't know. If it was worth it for you, you'd probably play in it for $25,000, right? So the fact that you're not makes me think that maybe $25,000 would be the amount that it would be worth it to sell it. When you get down from there, it all comes down to you want to get some experience in these higher level tournaments anyway. We are recreational players. Nothing wrong with taking a shot and having a good time, learning something from it. You're probably not a favorite in the tournament, but who knows? That's part of being a recreational player, having fun. And then it's just a question of, how much is the entry when you get down below that and where it's your own personal line. Have any of you guys been in that position before where you've got that ticket? I know Doug, one of our premium members, this subject came up in our weekly study group for premium members at Rec.Poker. We meet every Saturday morning and just talk poker strategy. And Doug said he'd been in a spot like this several years ago where he felt like his skill edge, he wasn't going to have a skill edge in this high level tournament. So he just sold it, felt great about it, continued to crush the lower level tournaments. And, I'm sure he always wonders what would have happened if he binked that big one, but he felt like that was a good decision. Have you guys been in that spot or have you had a friend that you've counseled like that?
You can see the picture on the screen right now. That's me sitting at the World Series of Poker main event.
Yeah.
So I won that ticket and I decided to play it. I made it to day 2, but I didn't get the money. But it's kind of one of those types of things where you want to experience it to really understand who you are in the poker spectrum from the beginner to the more professional player, to feel what it's like to be in that situation. I think it's a good indicator of where you're at and what you need to work on.
And if it hadn't been
so if you can do it for free or cheaply,
yeah, I like that, Rob. And Rob, if it
worthwhile.
If it hadn't been the main event, would that have changed your thinking on that when it came to whether to play or not?
No, I don't think so. I think I would have. No, I think I would have either way. I think it's important to understand where you are, I think, and to stretch yourself a little bit. If you're always playing tournaments that you're comfortable in, you're not going to know where you need to work. I guess you're never going to know what you need to work on to get to that next level.
Yeah, I
so
think
you don't do it all the time, but you do it every now and again.
I think it really depends upon what your poker goals are. I mean, if you're actually making money from poker, then you should never satellite into a tournament and play it that you aren't comfortable direct buying into it. If you don't have the bankroll for it, because once you've got it, if you can sell that seat, then that's cash. And at that point, it's your decision to play in it. So if you are a professional, that's the way you look at it. Having said that, I was in a not quite as good of a position as Rob, but a few years ago, Running Aces was having their anniversary tournament, and it was a $2,500 buy-in. And I satellited in for, I think it was a $250 satellite, maybe even been a $125, but I won a seat to it. And I could have sold it at that point in time, but I didn't even seriously considering selling it because I really wanted the experience. To this day, that's the most expensive tournament I have ever played in. My personal threshold is I'll direct buy, generally speaking, into a tournament if it's $500 or less. And I do violate what I just talked about, and I'll try to satellite into more expensive tournaments. But I'm not looking at poker as an income. I'm looking at it as something I enjoy to do, and I try not to lose money doing it. So for me, it was worth the experience. Now, that particular tournament, I had Blake Bone to my left, first time I ever met him. And he just totally owned me. In hindsight, the way we were playing, but he knew exactly where he was. I had queens, he had kings, and like I doubled up my stack, and then he brought me right back down to my starting stack, like all within the first 3 levels. But it was a good experience for me. I was clearly outclassed. I should not have. It would not have been a good strategic buy-in to buy that tournament for myself, but I have no regrets at all playing it because I didn't need to have the money, and I can fund my poker bankroll if necessary from my other income. So that's the way I looked at it.
Yeah, and one of the great comments that came out in the forum was, you don't actually have to take that binary approach to it. Have you considered selling action? And that was a great just way to get at both of these things. As a recreational player, how can I save my bankroll a bit, but still have the experience of playing in the tournament? So, and just for our listeners that might not know exactly what I'm talking about. So basically the entry to the tournament's $1,000 or $10,000, whatever you want to call it. We'll say 1,000 to keep the math easy. And you really only have the bankroll to play a $500 tournament. Then you can sell half your action for the other $500, and you basically, 10% of the tournament winnings is $100, and you offer 5 friends $100 each to get 10% of your winnings if you win, and if you lose, they get nothing, but they get the sweat, and you get to kind of break down your variance a bit. So you're really only buying in for 500. Now you have to give up half your winnings. So, you do have to think about that a little bit. It is a great way to share that experience with other people, though, and to spread the variance around. And it is fun. If you've got a piece of somebody and they're doing well in the tournament, you know, you get to sweat them and cheer them on, and that is a fun experience as well. So it is a fun way to do it. And I don't know if Ben won't be able to, by the time this comes out, I think it'll be too late for Ben to take any advice out of it. But if you're in this spot in the future, that is something to think about. It's a good idea. And I should say, of course, only deal with trusted people. There's a lot of scam artists out there, you know, protect yourself, handle yourself professionally and properly. But, you know, working with people you trust, people in your friendship pool that you look up to, or like I say, just friends and family and loved ones that want to help support this dream of yours, could be a nice way to offset some of that cost. Have you guys sold action to tournaments before? I know Steve did a package when he went down to the WSOP last year, I think, which was a nice way to do it. I think I don't want to speak for Ben, but that was one of the things that we talked about in the study group as well was, you know, Ben actually won a few of these tournament entries. And so one of the things we talked about doing was maybe putting like a package together where let's say all the tournaments together added up to $2,000. Then you would just sell a share of that instead. And then the total prize money from all the tournaments would get split up according to that. So it is kind of a fun way to do it. But it makes it harder to keep 100% of your winnings. So there's always that element of betting on yourself versus defraying your risk is one of the things we love about poker, right, guys?
Right.
Yeah, well, and with tournament poker in particular, even if you are a winning player, it's really hard to realize your edge, to play enough in live poker games to actually realize the edge you have over the field. So that's where you'll see lots of poker pros even. They'll swap pieces of each other because that brings down the variance and then they can afford to play more.
Yeah, and I know there is sort of a gray area when it comes to swapping and owning pieces of each other. If you end up in positions where you're playing against each other, there's this opportunity for collusion that wouldn't necessarily exist otherwise. And I think you know, the poker world is doing a pretty good job of just coming up with ways to handle that. And I think as long as people are disclosing at the table that they're switching action with people or something like that, I don't see any problem with it. Mm-hmm. And swapping is a fun way. And just that we're all friends, right? Like we're all in this together. So there is something fun about being able to cheer on your buddy and having some skin in the game too, right? So one thing that if he is going to play, and we'll just keep using Ben as an example here, what are a few things that he should be thinking about in advance of it? And I think some of the basic stuff is basic for a reason, but it's just really good. Sleep properly, for God's sake. Like, you know when the tournament's going to be. Plan out, just plan out the couple days before then so that you're not too stressed out. You're able to get a reasonable amount of sleep for a couple nights in a row. Plan to have some good food available and to, like, you know, do whatever routine you got to do to get yourself comfy so that when you wake up that day, you can be focused, you can endure the trials of the day. You know, these big tournaments are likely going to be multi-day affairs anyway. So you just don't want to go into them already tired, already unfocused. Do yourself a favor and take that time to prepare.
Well, and if you have time, your schedule permits, go in a day or two early. And, you know, if it's somewhere whenever someone goes to play at the World Series of Poker for the first time, I always recommend they go in the day before their event, go to the room, walk the halls, see all of the famous poker players that they know, and get through the awe of just seeing 20,000 people playing poker in all of the rooms there, so that you can actually focus on your play when the time comes. And the same thing is true if you're going to, if it's a new room for you, go and play a couple of hands, even if it's only for a cash game for a little bit, to get familiar with the area. Make sure you're familiar with any rules variations that they might have at that particular place, if there are any that you're not used to. So coming in and just feeling comfortable is a good way to do that. And you can do that by, play one of their daily cheap tournaments the day before, or play a little cash, whatever it is, walk the halls, figure out where the restrooms are. But make sure that you make yourself as comfortable as you can for an event that's a little bigger than you're used to.
I think that applies even if you're playing online too. Don't let that be the first time you've played on that site. All the different site softwares have different weird buttons, and the menus are in weird spots and stuff like that. Familiarize yourself with it, and all the other stuff too. Eating properly, sleeping right, having your workstation set up the way you want it so that you can be comfortable. We talked about all this stuff in a seminar recently that Chris Jones put together about preparing for big tournaments. And a lot of it just comes down to put yourself in a position where you can make good decisions, right? I mean, that's all poker is. Range people well, pay attention to the right things and give yourself every opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like just on the felt, just anytime you're going up in stakes, you're gonna encounter much more competent play. You're just gonna encounter players who are not letting you get away with some of the things that you might be used to at the stake level that you're playing at. Like I can 3-bet a little wider because nobody's gonna play back at me, or maybe I've gotten used to, calling with some speculative hands because let's just see where we land and nobody's gonna punish me for it. And you're gonna the more you go up in stakes, the more those kinds of spots are gonna come up. And so if you're gonna take that shot, you really need to start basically, you're not as scared of any of your opponents, but you need to assume a competence level that maybe you're not used to, and maybe start to think about how that changes your strategy. Does that make me, am I going to approach this tournament? Am I going to play, much tighter than I normally play? Am I going to play much, looser than I normally play? How am I going to approach certain situations, certain textures? Really starting to think about how you approach this, knowing or thinking that you're going to have players like Blake Bond sitting around you. Like how is that going to influence how I approach these hands?
Yeah, and on that note, there's two things that I always think about when I'm considering entering a tournament where I don't feel like I have a skill edge. So I guess three things, because the first thing is, why am I entering this tournament? Wait a second, I've already decided I don't have a skill edge. Why am I entering this tournament? I guess it's for ego reasons. So then once I've decided that I'm going to enter the tournament, obviously we joke, but one thing is you should be playing in tournaments where you have a skill edge. That's what game selection is really important, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a spot where you found yourself in a position to play a big tournament for free. The fact that it's a tournament that you wouldn't play normally tells us that you don't have a skill edge in that game. So the question is now, how do I negate the skill edge of the field relative to my play? So there's two ways to do that. The first, and someone mentions here in the forum post as well, the deeper these tournaments get, the more expensive the entry gets. Typically, the deeper the tournaments get and the better the structure. So you're going to start with more chips, and you're going to have more chips for longer. So that means two things. One, big stacks are the skilled player's friend. All right, they're not your friend. If you feel like you're giving up a skill edge, having a big stack doesn't really help you. It's the other players that are going to use the bottom of your stack better than you are. You're going to be using those first 50 big blinds just as well as they are, but you're going to be making more mistakes 200 big blinds deep than they are. So someone in our study group, Kim at PetVet, one of our technicians here at Rec.Poker, said one good way to think about that is you might consider late regging to this tournament, because you're going to have a shorter stack and you're just not going to be able to make as expensive mistakes. So that's something to think about. There is a trade-off there, because usually what happens is the better tournament players last longer than the worst tournament players. So if you late reg, generally what's happened is, more of the worst players have left the tournament by the time you get there. So the opportunity cost for late regging is that you don't have the chance to win pots from players that are making the kind of mistakes in the first few levels, and they're just not going to be around in those later levels. So there's a trade-off there, and I'm not sure there's a cookie cutter right answer for that. It's probably very tournament dependent. It's probably very you dependent, but there's a trade-off there that you might consider. And there's nothing wrong with just registering at the normal time and just playing very tight, and like not making not making a mistake. But you're not really going to be playing your best poker if you do that. And you kind of, if you don't, so the second thing about when you feel like you're giving up a skill edge on the field is to embrace volatility. Take on the variance, make the variance your friend, because you want to get lucky in a couple spots, because mostly the people that are better at poker than you are going to be making better poker decisions than you. So if you have a chance to take a flip, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, in one of the Eric Anderson or Monkey System posts. If you're considering taking a flip, one of the things you should think about is, am I going to get a spot later in this tournament where I can take a better spot because of my skill edge? And if the answer is yes, you should probably pass on that spot, pass on the coin flip, and try and find a better spot later in the tournament. But if the fact is most of the people in the tournament are going to be better than you later, take the flip, man. Embrace that variance and see if you can double up here with ace king versus queens. It's the kind of thing that, yeah, you're going to go home half the time, but you're going to be better off taking that 50-50 flip than you are trying to decide whether to call with a bluff catcher on the river out of position with a bunch of people that are just better at poker than you are. So yeah, what do you guys think when it comes to the trade-offs of late registering to preserve like stack height versus not playing against the worst players in the tournament?
I think I'd rather play against the worst players in the tournaments to start, to try to build up a bigger stack myself.
So would
avoid the tough spots, right?
Yeah. And I think the other thing to consider is, if we're doing this, one of the reasons that we're talking about doing this is sort of like the experience and taking a shot and let's go and let's try it and let's learn and let's whatever. Now, if we show up 4 hours late into the 4-hour reg window, I never think that players should think about that longevity or stay. Like, you got to be willing to go out on the first hand if that's what the cards dictate to you. But your odds of playing a little bit longer and gaining that experience are a lot better if you show up when it begins. So I'm a fan. I mean, I understand the logic behind that, because you're showing up with some better players who are going to have deeper stacked and they're going to have an advantage on you. But you're also going to show up with some weaker players at the beginning of a tournament too. So there's probably an equal trade-off there. And if we're doing this because we're taking that shot or getting that experience, I think I'm showing up. I'm not missing a hand.
Well, let's take 36 seconds here to listen to Jonathan Little, and then I want to get back at this stack size discrepancy. All right, here we go.
Have you ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead? What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it, or do you just call? What do you do with ace-king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/RecPoker right now.
He does make it sound good, that Jonathan Little. And just before we get back to it, I should also say Steve Fredlin, you all know him and love him. He helps small business owners every day. So if you or someone you know is a small business owner, go to smallbusiness.com and see if there's a way for you to work with Steve. I'm sure he can help you out. So here we are. We're talking about how to defend yourself in these tournaments where you feel like you're giving up a skill edge. And we talked about some of the virtues of late registration. And I agree with what you guys are saying. There's this tension between holding your own, taking advantage of the weaker seats at the table that are there while they're there. Can you guys think about any advice or tips for players that are going to be playing in that deep stacked way that might help them defend themselves? The one that jumps out to me would just be play way fewer hands out of position. However you find yourself out of position, just don't do it. Be exploitably tight out of the blinds. Just don't do it. Other than that, what do you guys think? Are there certain kinds of hands people should stay away from, or certain general rules, stuff like that?
I think one of the biggest things, particularly for a live tournament, it's easy to lose track of what the stack sizes really are. And you might think, you lost half your stack, but if the structure is good, you might still have 40 or 50 big blinds. So you need to be aware of that and be willing to be patient. I think that was my biggest adjustment from playing smaller tournaments to going to some bigger ones, was just, you have to be more patient. You have more play, so take advantage of that. And don't be afraid to fold early, but also don't let yourself be intimidated. Remember, no matter how good everyone else is, they're still putting on their pants one leg at a time too. So, play your best poker, but don't be intimidated.
And the other thing, when we're playing deep stack, I like that about the patience thing. The thing that I sometimes see as structures get deeper is that there's this sort of, when you're playing in a daily tournament and you're starting off with 50 big blinds and it's quickly down to 20, there's this kind of rhythm that you have to sort of get used to in smaller tournaments, right? That like by the time we get into sometimes 3-betting, certainly 4-betting, we're all in. Like, let's just go. Let's, like we're shoving. And there's and I see this when people get deep stacked, that they're used to that rhythm, but they're not actually counting out what that actually means. And so you see sometimes what happens is I've got some sort of hand that I know that I'm like in a normal tournament, I'm getting all in with, right? But here, there's some room here to like navigate that and negotiate it a bit. So like really thinking about bet sizing and really thinking about how that fits into the SPR, the stack to pot ratio, is a really important thing to be thinking about once our stacks get a lot deeper. Because we don't want to make this mistake of snapping off our entire stack in a situation where it would make a ton of sense in most of the tournaments we're playing in. And in this tournament, it really doesn't. And so those are the kind of spots you want to look out for and really be thinking about how you're going to play them differently.
Yeah, and the structure is going to be different, as Chris says. Like, it's going to be a different structure. You're not going to be familiar with how quickly the stacks dwindle, or how slowly. And so there are going to be spots where you like feel an urgency that isn't there necessarily. I think that's really important too. And even to the point of use your time bank. Just don't make snap decisions. You have to factor in a few more things. Take the time. Think about look around. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, oh, snap shove here, and then like as soon as the chips are, I'm like, oh wait, I was supposed to be waiting for if I two more hands, and like that is a terrible feeling, friends of Rec Poker Nation. And if I could spare you that, I would. So there's no urgency in the same way, especially at these deeper stacks. Typically, is the way it goes.
Yeah, and I think the most important advice I could give anyone in this situation is just be sure to enjoy it. I mean, you've already decided that you're not taking this You're not playing this tournament because you think it is good for your bankroll. So make sure you're getting your value out of it. And that doesn't mean you have to win it, but it means you should enjoy the time that you're playing, enjoy the experience. Don't be so intimidated that you can't.
Yeah, so true. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? And I think that's part of what you should be doing there, is having the life experience and enjoying it, and you know, making it part of what makes you a better poker player in the future too, right?
Yep.
And one last thing about that, because I think the first time I played in a tournament that was like a bigger stake than I was used to, and I was, you know, I probably shouldn't have been in it. Like I was just like, I satellited in. I was in the same situation. Like I satellited in to the MSPT. I said, I'm doing this, let's go. But I think I had some of the strategic framework where I felt like I was not a favorite in there, but I felt comfortable. I felt like my strategic game was fine, but I was intimidated, and it affected the way that I played, to the point. And part of what it affected me was I cared, you know, like I cared what the other people at that table thought of me. Like I wanted to like not sort of like make these giant mistakes, and it ended up sort of like making my game like I took less chances. I became more passive. I was like, I'm just not going to make this mistake. I don't want anyone to be like whispering under their breath, oh, look at this donkey, what's, you know, like, and it really did affect the way I played. And so like I just think part of that enjoying it is like play your game too. Like don't let the stakes and the thing that you're trying to take this chance make you sort of like nervous about what other people are thinking of you, because that's what's going to lead them thinking you aren't playing that well in the first place.
And I mean, you said it perfectly, right? And you end up making the kind of adjustments that you shouldn't be making to your game. Especially in these situations where we talked about, where you feel like you're giving up a skill edge against the field. The last thing you should be doing is playing straightforward, like passive, wait until I hit it poker, because they're going to be better at knowing your play than you are knowing theirs, so they're going to be able to sniff you out on that. But you know, that second point that we talked about earlier, you're not increasing the volatility, increasing the variance in your game. And so just before we go, I want to talk about that a little bit. So there's two real obvious ways to increase the variance in your game, which is to shove a lot and call a lot of shoves. So I don't necessarily advocate for that I mean, my playing style does seem to mimic that from time to time, but can you guys think about some other ways?
I mean, you could go step a little bit before that and maybe 3-bet more. You could defend more from the blinds. You could, you know, there's other ways to do that besides just getting all your chips in the middle.
Oh, well, I can't wait to find. Yeah, so go ahead.
So one of the things, the bigger the skill edge you have, the bigger or the smaller the stack to pot ratio or whatever, the bigger the stacks favor the bigger edge. So what you probably want to do is don't do as much small ball as you might normally play. You know, instead of doing the 2.2x, go ahead and make it 2.7, or maybe even do 3x openings. And that's going to be okay for this tournament, and that will decrease your opponent's edge that they have over you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Lower the SPR, and then also be thoughtful in that case about the hands that you're putting in your opening range, because you're going to be playing lower SPR pots, so you want to have the kind of hands that are going to perform well in those spots. And Chris made an excellent point here as well about other ways to inject aggression or volatility into the game. Don't always have to involve putting your very last chip in the middle. And so, 3-betting is just a great way to do that. Now, this is going to be a group typically that's very familiar with 3-betting. So, we're not saying get it a line, but we're saying when you have the choice between, and we're not saying take negative EV decisions either. Don't ever take a negative EV play. But if you can take a spot that's kind of tied between a passive and an aggressive action, you're more inclined to take that aggressive action when you don't feel like you have a skill edge to preserve for later in the tournament. So that's all really good stuff. What other tips would we give to Ben or someone like him who's getting ready to take this shot? So consider whether you should play or not. Consider if you want to defray the cost by selling some action, and find the right people to do that with. I don't know if maybe people haven't heard of markup. It's just a way of capturing other costs associated with. So let's say, we'll just talk about this quickly and then we'll let it go. In the earlier example, there was a tournament for $1,000 and we were charging $100 for 10% of the tournament. If we felt like we had a real high skill edge and that we were more than average likely to win money in the tournament, then we could charge 1.1 or 1.2 markup on our action. And what that means is that instead of $100, it would be $110 or $120 for that same 10%. So if you sold your entire tournament at 1.2, you could sell 100% of the action for a $1,000 tournament for $1,200. And there are professionals out there that just grind the rake essentially on that, and they'll just sell 100% of their action at 1.2. They can live off that $200 per tournament, and all they need to do is, you know, perform well enough that they can still sell action, and they kind of got it made. Other times people will add markup if there are costs associated with the tournament, like travel or lodging, or other things like that have to be factored into their buy-in essentially. But if you're just starting out, just offer 1-to-1 and just tell your friends, you know, this much is 10% is 10%, and get some experience with that.
Especially in a tournament where you think you don't have a skill edge, that would not be one I would start selling markup in.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
And they actually, I mean, there are
hard to sell.
There are exchanges set up now. I mean, the world's come a long way. I don't want to advocate for any because I don't know them well enough, but you can sell your action at a loss. You can sell your action at 0.9 because you understand that you're giving up a skill edge, but you still want to have your tournament subsidized. And, you know, like there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to you want to get in this tournament, it's worth paying a little to do it. Sell it at 0.9 and you know, eat a little bit of that rake to get in there, but it won't cost you as much. And it's fun. It is fun. I mean, it's fun, isn't it? For God's sake.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining me this week. Rob Washam, John Somsky, and Chris Jones. I want to thank Ben for putting the awesome post out there. And of course, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thank you so much. Good night.